Hans, yesterday Republicans, the House GOP, released their long-awaited report on Biden corruption. Basically, it came out of the impeachment inquiry. And the timing of that, I think we both found to be deeply, deeply frustrating, particularly as it came on the heels, that literally the DNC itself had executed a coup on Biden and pushed him out. That was truly the great irony, is that here the GOP is putting forth a report on an impeachment inquiry on Joe Biden after Democrats had already made the preemptive move and pushed him out when the GOP had effectively done nothing. By all appearances, almost kind of a toothless impeachment inquiry. What was your reaction to everything?
I had the same reaction. And then I had an even worse reaction when I actually looked at this thing. So this thing is called Report of the Impeachment Inquiry of Joseph Biden, President of the United States. So the 291 pages, you and I know this story really, really well in terms of what happened in Romania, Ukraine, and stuff for China, of course, we've talked about on previous shows as well.
We've even had some input on this.
Yes, we have. And so I was, of course, at first, disappointed that it came so late and he's already out the door and whatever. But it's nice, at least, or so I thought, we now have this whole thing in writing. Someone has sort of captured it for posterity's sake, 291 pages, the whole story. Fantastic, right? And then I started going through it. And at first I did a keyword search just because I didn't want to read 291 pages before, drawing some kind of preliminary conclusion. So I just did a kind of a keyword search about things that I thought were particularly interesting, and I wanted to know what they were saying about it. And then keyword after keyword, I found it doesn't show. There's no mention of it. So let me give you an example here. One of the keywords I started off with Shokin. Okay, Shokin is the prosecutor in Ukraine that Biden got fired. Everyone knows that story. So he is mentioned, not that many times, but okay, he is mentioned. And then I thought, okay, the Shokin story is pretty easy in its basic outline. Biden got him fired because Burisma wanted him to get fired, but the details are really, really important. So then I looked at the people who were involved in some way on the Biden side. There's Amos Hochstein. We've talked about him. He was Obama's energy czar, deeply involved in that. No mention. And it was Eliza Slotkin, the Democrat. She was on the plane with Biden going to Kiev when all this went down. We don't know exactly about her role, but very important person just by her standing. Well, no mention. So, oh, that's strange. Then I was like, okay, what about when the Ukrainians found out about it? And our old friend Eric Ciamarella, the so-called Ukraine whistleblower, that guy, well, he was entangled with that. Isn't that hugely fascinating? The fact that the guy who later blew the whistle on Trump falsely a few years earlier was involved with the firing of the prosecutor, at least in a sense that he was there when he organized the meeting when the Ukrainians were informed about it. Well, he's not mentioned either. And so we can go through this list, but just pass it back to you here. I mean, that was my reaction after 5 minutes, that all of these people I was looking for weren't mentioned in the report.
Yeah, I think we were both looking for the same things. And, we're looking for people like Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Pyatt, Eric Ciamarella, Amos Hochstein, all these people that were, as you mentioned, were directly tied in. And in some cases, they were omitted entirely. In other cases, they were referred to almost tangentially, where there was a casual reference as opposed to a focus. And every one of these people that either you or I have mentioned, they were intimately tied into the entire thing in terms of the cover-up. You had Jeffrey Pyatt and Victoria Nuland were very much intertwined with protecting Biden from the allegations surrounding Mykola Zlochevsky as a corrupt oligarch. They were both very much intimately involved in developing the sudden narrative that Viktor Shokin was a corrupt prosecutor, and that was the appropriate action was to push him out, despite the DOJ's official position being exactly opposite that. So all of that glossed over. The big one for me really, really bothered me was the allegations from Latvia of money laundering that surrounded Hunter Biden, Devon Archer, two other unnamed Americans, which I would guess there's a decent shot. One of those is Cofer Black, the former CIA assistant director, whatever his position was, high up in the CIA, who just so happened to be on the board of Burisma with Hunter Biden. So the fact that they didn't do that, there was another aspect as well, and I was very, very upset at the timing of this because it was so incredibly convenient. And I'm sure that Republicans are going to say they issued it on this day because they wanted to have the ammo out in front of the DNC convention. Well, first of all, nobody at the DNC is paying the slightest bit of attention. Second of all, effectively, it reinforces probably what the DNC wanted. Their whole desire is to have Joe Biden step out. Their whole desire is to have him do that without any pushback, any fanfare, create any problems for the DNC. That's the reason why they had him speak on the first night. Joe Biden's already been washed through. He's done. He's gone. He's in the dustbin of history as far as the DNC is concerned. And what does the GOP do? They come out with a report that details all of Biden's crimes on the morning of the night that he's going to speak and get washed through the DNC. I mean, that's almost more effective than anything the DNC could have done in terms of firing a warning shot over Joe Biden's bow, telling him, hey, you got to stay quiet and play ball and play along. And we'll come back to this because there's some other aspects there that really troubled me. But, you know.
What I'm sure you noticed the same. That was the stories that we've talked a bit about the stories they didn't tell. And we'll come back to that because there's still one really, really, really big one. I know I said really 3 times, but it's that huge, and they just didn't talk about it at all. We'll get back to that. We should spend a bit more time on that. But before we do that, we should say that all the stuff they do write about, we all knew about. You and I have been tweeting about for years. People like Steve McIntyre have huge threads detailing all this stuff in minute detail.
And maybe closing in on 100 articles between the two of us on that same thing.
Absolutely. Others as well, of course.
Yes.
It's just there's a huge amount of resources on this that goes back to 2019, at least, the first impeachment inquiry, where people really started focusing in on these stories. So this idea that it took them until August 2024 to release this report is just ludicrous. Is it incompetence? Is it on purpose? Obviously, I think it can't just be incompetence because all this work should have been done. Yeah, okay. You can't just say, oh, this guy said it on Twitter, therefore, it's true or whatever. You got to put a bit of work in it. But that work could have started easily in 2019. It should have definitely started after Biden became president, before the GOP had their majority, because you want to be ready. You want to have, all your ducks in a row when you come in. And they had nothing ready when they came in. And they didn't even start right away when they came in. So this report, as it is, as meek as it is, should have been published many, many, many years ago. And then, of course, we haven't talked about some of the most egregious stuff, which they don't even mention in the report.
Yeah, it's 291 pages. So there is a lot of good details in here. And both you and I have gone through it, but we haven't read it cover to cover. I'm sure there's some incremental details that we may find in there, but that was really kind of the first notable aspect. And if anybody is curious, you can find this for yourselves by simply going to the report and reading the primary conclusions, which are all of a page and a paragraph plus. That's it. You'll know everything that's in those conclusions. So this point that you were making about people already having known all this and tweeted about it forever. Anybody who's been even remotely involved in following what Biden did in Ukraine, and I don't want to say to a lesser degree in China, because that's actually much worse, but it just hasn't been focused on. That's what I mean by a lesser degree. It hasn't been as publicized, along with Romania, Kazakhstan, Mexico to a small degree, but all of these countries. There's nothing in there as you casually kind of go through it and you're reading the report. It's like kind of an agglomeration of the top tweets on Joe Biden surrounding, say, Burisma, Ukraine, Biden corruption. You know all this. There's no earth-shaking revelations. And the other item that kept striking me is how they so assiduously stayed away from anything that there was sort of untouchable topics, it seemed like.
They
And,
certainly were.
we covered a lot of those right at the beginning, but they have a common theme. Anything that might surround the intelligence community, um, anything that had to do with putting blame on Obama. Obama is listed in there, I believe, this is off memory, so don't shoot me. I think it's like 33 times his name comes up. Like 28 of those are the Obama Biden administration simply because they were talking about activities. Nowhere is there any blame or even kind of the loose finger pointing at what did Obama know, which I, have always maintained is one of the biggest omissions in all of this is just focusing in on Biden corruption because Biden's dispensable and not looking at what did Obama know because top officials in his administration enabled everything that Biden was doing while he was VP on these corruption related issues.
But I'd say even on the Biden issue, they never crossed the line. And by the line, I mean where kind of innuendo and insinuations become provable facts, and corruption just out for everyone to see. And that line they never cross. And there's a couple of examples here. You mentioned Latvia. Latvia is an EU member. Latvia had an actual money laundering investigation into the Hunter Biden money transfers out of Ukraine. That's a fact. We have the documents. Why is that not talked about? I mean, that's kind of the hard evidence that you'd be looking for.
And that wasn't a political investigation. That was originated just by them they didn't know who was behind what they were seeing.
There was just a guy in Latvia who ran their money laundering unit over there. He's called Viskans Burkans. I've memorized that over the years because I've come back across him so many times. He's just your typical bureaucrat. This guy has no politics. No one's ever heard of him. He's got nothing to do with anything. He's just some guy in Latvia. He had worked in the EU for a while. I mean, there's absolutely nothing with this guy where he's political in any way whatsoever. So he's just doing his job, and then there's all these weird payments coming out of Ukraine to Hunter Biden. And, he started investigating, and the investigation led him to believe that this was money laundering. So they opened a full money laundering investigation into these transfers. Then they sought the help of the Ukrainians, who, of course, were like, oh, can't do that. We don't know how that, see the details of how that was stopped. Ukrainian participation in the investigation and cooperation. There wasn't any. How did that stop? Who kind of weighed on whom to make that happen? This would have been very, very important to analyze further. But again, the main point is that this was not mentioned at all, like not at all, zero. I mean, this is just it just goes to the heart of what these guys were up to. These guys, meaning the GOP, that they would never cross that line. I'll give you another example that I find so egregious. In one instance, they just make a false statement. The GOP does. Now, we might say, oh, that was just an error, sloppiness, whatever. But it's such a crucial false statement that I think it wasn't done by sloppiness. I think it was on purpose. There's this whole timeline. I'm not going to rehash it, but there is a whole timeline as to how the Burisma guy, Vadim Pojarski, the CFO, told Hunter, both in person and by email, in November of 2015, you have to stop these investigations. We know that. That's a fact. Okay, they don't talk much about that either. And then in very short order, Joe Biden changes unilaterally, this is very important, changes U.S. policy on the prosecutor. And suddenly Joe Biden himself decides we need to fire this guy. No one else, everyone else was saying the opposite, that this guy's great. Now that happened on November 22nd. And the reason why I mention that date is because that's shortly after the demand came from Burisma. And we have a document that proves it. But the GOP doesn't talk about any of that. Instead, the GOP says Joe Biden changed course in December of 2015. So a few weeks after that, after an alleged phone call from Hunter. And then they have all this innuendo about the phone call. Devin Archer said there might have been a phone call and he might have overheard something, but he's not sure. And it's all absolute innuendo. So to be honest, this is useless.
And you're talking about the phone call that happened between Joe Biden, Mykola Zlochevsky, Vadim Pozarski, Hunter Biden, Devin Archer, sitting in a room in, where were they? They were in
Dubai.
Dubai.
Right, but Devin says
Directly after Burisma's board meeting, when they knew they had the New York Times article coming out. Yeah.
correct. So this is in, I think, December 5th of 2015, something like
Yeah.
that. The problem is that is not useful. Well, it might be useful information in sort of an innuendo way, but it's not useful in any legal way, because Devin Archer says he left the room.
Yep.
And he doesn't really know what happened, and he doesn't even know whether there was a phone call. So it's all just kind of speculation. How can you pin the core of this entire case, which is that Joe Biden changed U.S. government policy to benefit Hunter and Burisma, which we know is true? We have a lot of pieces of evidence, but they don't use those pieces of evidence. They use this phone call, which is just innuendo. And to me, that was like the biggest red flag in this entire report, other than the issue we're still going to get to here. There's one more. We'll get into that here in a few minutes. But just to start off with that one, that to me, the fact that they got that wrong, because they say the first time that Joe Biden changed course was, at that phone call. And we know, well, first of all, we don't know whether there was a phone call, but second of all, we know that that's not true, because we have the documents that he changed course.
No, that phone call, because there's an email with Vadim Pozharsky where he acknowledges that call. But nevertheless, it's not a provable issue. They're shying away from the important stuff that transpired before, that set in a cascade of events in motion. After that email from Pozharsky, Hunter Biden reaches out and contacts Amos Hochstein the same day, sets up a meeting. 4 days later, he's meeting with Amos Hochstein, Obama's envoy. Same guy who later warned Joe Biden, like, hey, this is a little bit dicey what your son is doing. And of course, Biden ignores him.
And then Biden changes the policy on the prosecutor. He puts it in his...
The official DOJ policy.
Right. That's right. At the same time, while interagency, DOJ, everyone is perfectly happy with the prosecutor. And again, this is documented. By the way, Biden doesn't tell these other people. They still think the prosecutor is fine. Everything's fine. Biden has a talking points memo for his chat with the Ukrainian president, as well as with the Ukrainian prime minister, where suddenly, November 22nd, 2015, the line appears, prosecutor needs to be fired. We can directly draw a line between what you just said, that Vadim Pozharsky told Hunter to make this happen, and it happening. Why the GOP would try to fudge this and then pin it on a phone call, which, Pozharsky might say it happened, but the GOP focuses on it's like almost deliberate that they're trying to focus on something that they know is not provable, because they're saying, oh, Devin Archer thinks there might have been a phone call. That's their proof. That's in the report. And in any case, that's the weakest piece of evidence out of all, but that's the one they pinned this whole thing on.
There's another element, too, that highlights this, and I like it because it also highlights the IC element. And, of course, I'm going back to the Latvia allegations. Now, the Latvia allegations said that there was a series of loan payments, and I'm reading a quote here, totaling about $16.6 million that were routed from companies in Belize and the United Kingdom to Burisma through Ukraine's Privat Bank between 2012 and 2015. And the Latvian officials claimed that a portion of these proceeds were then transferred to Hunter, Devin, and the two unnamed individuals, U.S. citizens. Now, these allegations were sent in the very early part of February 2016, if memory serves. And they came into the Ukraine prosecutor's office. It was this newly established unit that we've talked about before called NABU. And it was an anti-corruption division that was effectively almost like a competitive counterpart to the prosecutor's office. And that office had been established by none other than Joe Biden. He pushed for its creation. And we had members of the FBI that were staffing on site at that office, ultimately created a formal office within an office. The point of that is that it is all but impossible that the FBI was unaware of these money laundering allegations. They were there, present, on site, very small unit, when these allegations came in. Those allegations got memory holed by Ukraine. They went nowhere. Latvia gave up and is on record saying they gave up because there was no response from Ukrainian officials. Well, as part of that subset of Ukrainian officials was the FBI. Running cover for Hunter Biden, for Devin Archer, maybe for Kofor, certainly for Burisma, Zlochevsky. And that all got derailed. And all of this keeps coming back to these certain areas where the GOP just knows they are not to go.
Yeah,
And
they won't cross that line.
they won't
As we
cross
say,
that line.
the Latvia is not mentioned once.
No, nor is
That's just
Privat Bank.
incredible. 291 pages, not once. This whole thing, just memory hole, didn't exist, didn't happen, because of course this is going to be portrayed as the sort of the one report that captures the best case of Biden corruption because it came out of the GOP. I mean, from history's perspective, right?
Right.
And it's just absolutely terrible because, yeah, as you said, it mentions this and that and whatever, but it's innuendo, it's this. All the really juicy stuff is not in there. And that brings me to Privatbank and Kolomoisky. This is, to me, was the biggest one. To be honest, Jeff, it took me, I was so focused on no Sierra Mella and no Hochstein and no this and no Latvia and so on, that it, like, about 5 or 10 minutes later, I was like, oh, yeah, I haven't done Privatbank yet. I did Privatbank. And I fell off my chair. It was just unbelievable. No mention of Privatbank. And I was like, that cannot be. Then I looked for Kolomoisky, because we'll explain this here in a moment, but those two tie in. That's the owner of Privatbank. And no mention. I was like, no, that's just not possible. You cannot have a
very
report on
powerful
Biden.
Ukrainian oligarch that.
Right. I said, you cannot have, that's impossible. So it's like, okay, how these Ukrainian names are always spelled differently. I must have had a different spelling. So I tried like all these different spellings. The guy isn't mentioned once. He's just not in there. And that, to me, was just the proof. If I didn't really need any more, I already had it, but the final proof that this entire thing is a complete stitch up. The GOP just put out something so that they can wash their hands, but they never crossed the line. And now we'll explain why why Kolomoisky, Biden, and Privatbank is so crucial.
Well, it just goes right back to the money laundering allegations.
Exactly.
Latvia puts forth these money laundering allegations, and they basically point the finger at Privat Bank being the clearinghouse, Privat Bank, however it's supposed to be said, that's controlled by Kolomoisky.
Right.
And of course, we already just discussed how that got completely ignored and tamped down. And that, just to step back for a moment, you and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my own perspective has been the really two big events when it comes to Burisma is focusing on those Vadim Pozharskyi emails, directing them to take action in November, and a couple emails prior now showing that they had a plan in effect that wasn't working and they had to ramp up that involved Joe Biden. That involved bringing Joe Biden in. And then the money laundering allegations out of Latvia. Those are the two big warning flags, and those are, of course, the ones that are ignored. Those have been our focus, and yet it's not the focus of the GOP.
Right.
So going back to the Privat Bank,
yeah,
we have these money laundering allegations that surround Privat Bank. And what happens towards the end of Joe Biden's term? So the allegations come in February of 2016.
Yeah.
In November 2016, after Trump has suddenly won an upset election that most people did not see coming, what happens? Why don't you go ahead and explain it to everybody?
Yeah, this is the key. I mean, that's why I was so completely shocked that none of this is in here. So Joe Biden then, of course, knew Trump is coming in. He's got about 8 weeks to clean up.
In a shock win. That's important because it plays into the timing.
He's got 7 to 8 weeks, whatever it is, from November 8th to onwards in this interim period to clean things up.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets on the phone to Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, and orders him to nationalize Privatbank because he doesn't want Trump to find out what happened. He says that. And we know because these tapes exist because of someone in Poroshenko's office who either deliberately or surreptitiously, we don't know, taped these. This was on speakerphone, and someone taped it and then released those tapes back in 2020. And the media, by the way, suppressed those tapes, claiming, and social media as well, claiming that they were fake or Russian or whatever, and they're absolutely real. And that actually happened. So Joe Biden ordered the president of Ukraine to nationalize that bank to conceal the problem from Trump.
And it's important to note that this isn't just us hypothesizing that Joe Biden wanted him to conceal it from Trump. It's Joe Biden saying he wants it concealed from Trump. So again, money allegations from Latvia surrounding Hunter Biden, Devon Archer, Burisma, all of that come in. The FBI, the NABU, sits on those, does nothing with them, refuses. The case dies in Latvia. Fast forward another 10 months or so, Trump wins out of nowhere, wins the election, and it sets off a scramble. One of the first actions by Joe Biden is to get on the phone with Petro Poroshenko and tell him, you've got to close, you've got to nationalize, take over and nationalize Privat banks so Trump doesn't find out what happened. Wow.
Exactly. We should mention there's a second kind of prong to this. The one, of course, is the fact that is the money laundering, the fact that this was the bank through which Hunter was paid, and all of that. There's a second prong, which is probably even worse. I mean, it's not personal corruption. It's kind of almost countrywide or whatever you want to call it. It goes wider. The second prong is the embezzlement. Privatbank was used by Kolomoisky to embezzle U.S. aid money. And, we have it at, I mean, there's different figures out there, 2-3 billion. We have it pretty firm at 1.5 billion that can be shown that were embezzled through. There was a scheme, it's sort of a complicated scheme where they would use a foreign bank, and then they would have the system where they would have a loan and then they would default. And anyway, it's a complicated system, but this is how, and then U.S. taxpayers had to kind of prop up the Ukrainian bank who had lost all this money, and just to keep it alive. And that kept going and going. And, this guy racked up 1.5 billion in aid that he embezzled. So that part as well was part of the cover-up. So there's the two sides to it. So we understand why Joe Biden would cover up, the Hunter part of it. But the fact that he also covered up and helped out an oligarch who embezzled 1.5 billion in U.S. aid money is beyond unconscionable. Not that the Hunter stuff isn't, but to me, that's even worse.
Well, but the same thing effectively happened with Mykola Zlochevsky, the owner of Burisma. The whole reason that he was the Minister of Natural Resources in the prior administration, pre the Maidan coup. And he used that position to enrich himself, and effectively, Burisma already existed, but it wasn't what it became, the size and scope. He designated all of these different licenses for natural gas and gave them to Burisma. That's part of what set off the original investigation that was proceeding in the UK before that got squashed by the prior prosecutor. Joe Biden knew all this. He knew it enough to the point that when he was heading for his first meeting with Poroshenko in December after the Vadim-Pozharsky meeting, I know we're jumping around on dates, a little confusing, but when Joe Biden was getting set to fly out and they just fundamentally altered official U.S. policy, was the same time that they created a list of questions for Joe Biden. And one of the questions was, do you think Mykola Zlochevsky is a corrupt oligarch? And the problem is there's no good answer to that question because he so obviously is. And the answer they came up with was, we don't get into the political aspects of corruption of another country, which is hilarious given that any time Joe Biden goes anywhere, he talks about corruption in the country that he's about to commit corruption.
To kind of close us out here, I mean, there's a lot of facts in terms of mainly what's not in the report that we've covered here. What is the GOP thinking? What on earth is going on here? I'll pass it over to you here in a moment, but I mean, my kind of best explanation is kind of what we said here a few moments ago, that there's a certain line they just won't cross. I don't understand the mechanism of why they won't cross it. It's that IC line. The thing when things get really touchy, they won't go there. By the way, exactly the same with COVID origin. They hammered the little bit players, but when it got to Fauci, when it got to the juice, they were like, oh, we're not going to touch that.
Department of Defense.
So, yeah, that's right. So to me, it's like they're fenced in. They won't cross that fence. They just won't do it, no matter what the topic is. The fence is it's difficult to describe in a few words, but it's sort of, I see DC corruption that like at the highest levels kind of thing. The Joe Biden part, for instance, the whole Privatbank that the fact that they didn't mention any of that. That's my best guess. But as I said, I don't know how the mechanism works. Like, how does every GOP member know not to cross that fence?
Well, what the way I think about it is what they're really doing is they're trying to stay away from exposing how the U.S. fundamentally operates with their foreign policy. And the fact that we have this integration of the intelligence communities, the Defense Department, the State Department, and these officials that can take advantage of all of this, that it's basically a way of not only exerting foreign influence, but the fact that that exertion of the foreign influence is inextricably combined with the way to make extra money on the side for all of DC. All of that is tied together, and that's that knotted ball that they just refuse to go after. And I think the reason, I was kind of thinking about it, like, why were we both so angry about this report? And the answer was because the report encapsulates everything about the fecklessness of the of the GOP. The idea that they issue this report that should have been out a year ago, they issue it after Joe Biden's already been pushed out by Democrats. Like, I mean, right there, that's galling enough as it is. They issue a sanitized version of the report that doesn't get into either of the two areas that you and I have always thought were the most important aspects. Those are completely ignored, the provable issues that
you make such a good point about this. I had probably put it in more general terms, but you specified, and I completely agree. And I'll give you an example here. The idea that it's the core of DC corruption, the essence of what DC is, especially with these foreign entanglements. That's what they don't touch. And I'll give you another example here in the report, which is Blue Star. Blue Star is mentioned once, kind of by the way, and then twice in the footnote, so 3 in total, kind of benign. Blue Star were these Democrat fixers, Democrat lobbyists who were on phone calls with Joe Biden's office, planning things for Ukraine, shaping Ukraine policy. By the way, that company was founded by, I think it was Bill Clinton's deputy chief of staff or something like that, Karen Tramontano. I'm not sure if I got that name right. But anyway, deeply entrenched DC Democrat lobbyist types. Don't get a mention. Well, one mention kind of, by the way, not in the way that we just described. Again, that goes to the point. That is something they don't want to cover. They don't want to peel back the onion on that at all whatsoever. Can't do it. Is it because they're involved themselves, or is it because of something else, some other mechanism? That's the part I don't fully understand.
Well, I think I may have an answer for that. You just triggered me to look for a name that I forgot to look for yesterday, and that was Boy Schiller. Boy Schiller is a law firm that Hunter Biden was employed at in the early days, back in 2014, 15, etc. As he was getting intimately involved in Burisma, went on their board, same time Joe Biden was setting Ukraine policy. So Boy Schiller literally set out to bring in members of Congress to start lobbying positively for Burisma, Mykola Zlochevsky, an oligarch that's as corrupt as can possibly be, to lobby and create a positive, I forget exactly what they called it, but it was sort of a positive aura of credibility. There was some sort of term that they used, and it was very close to what I just said. And they brought in people like Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, to be part of that. And he agreed, and his staff. Boy Schiller was the one that brought all of those people in, did all the behind the scenes work. Boy Schiller is mentioned here one time on page 287, and it's in a footnote. And the only reason they're mentioned, letter from Representative James Comer to Matthew Schwartz, managing partner Boy Schiller. That's the only time that Boy Schiller is mentioned. Why? They were like the driving force in the lobbying efforts. Why? Because they were bringing in people like Chris Murphy, a current sitting senator, to lobby and create this positive aura of respectability around Burisma exactly at the time that Hunter Biden joined the board and that Joe Biden began to set up shop in Ukraine.
Well, another useless report. Perhaps even more useless than the COVID report. But I think, maybe to close this out here, this is where we are. We cannot rely on people in Washington, D.C. to fix Washington, D.C. It's just not going to work.
Nope. You know, the only other thing I'd add is that if anybody wonders why Democrats had such a responsive, explosive reaction to Trump's phone call with the new president of Ukraine, Zelensky, this is why.